Welcome to A Waldorf Journey, a podcast for teachers, parents, students, and people who are passionate about Waldorf education. I'm Meredith, and I'm glad you're here. I spent nearly 20 years in the Waldorf classroom, and I learned a thing or two about teaching in all those years, and some of those lessons were not easy. Through it all, though, I've come to the conclusion that there's nothing better than Waldorf for nurturing thoughtful human beings who love to learn. You can find show notes for this episode, along with a lot more useful content on my website, awaldorfjourney.com. While you're there, sign up for the newsletter to receive updates about new content on the blog and the podcast. You can also follow me on Facebook and Instagram as A Waldorf Journey. Now let's get started. Hi, so I'm happy to be talking to you again today. And today I thought we would talk about drawing tools and different items and tools that we give our students to use for the work that they do in class. And because there are some different opinions and different thoughts out there and some things that we intentionally choose to do differently at Waldorf schools than you might see elsewhere. And so I think it could be good to just check in and talk about those things a little bit. To know, over the years, of course, I've developed a lot of opinions and thoughts about how to go about using these tools and managing them and helping your students to use them. And I'm sure many of you do too, if you're teachers or homeschoolers. And I would love to hear your thoughts and experiences with the different ones that I'm going to talk about. So I'm kind of going to do the sweep through grades 1 through 8 when it comes to tools that they use for drawing. And there might be a few little outlier things that I'm not going to talk about, but we'll see. We'll see as we get there. Because there are some specific lessons in the upper grades that you might do around a specific tool, but I'm not really going to talk about that. I'm really talking about the work that they're doing sort of every day in their lesson books. So let's dive in and talk about that. So first off, when you think about Waldorf education and you build a picture in your imagination of a child in first grade drawing in their main lesson book, what you probably imagine is a beeswax crayon. And this is definitely true that first graders are often given a set of block crayons and a set of stick crayons. Now, a few years ago, this is like many years ago, I think at this point, there was a lot brought up about the idea of students using block crayons and that it didn't encourage a healthy pencil grip. And I can get that. I can recognize that. And when I see my students, when I imagine my students using block crayons, their grip is not one that they are eventually going to use when they're holding a pencil. So to my mind, that's not a reason to just eliminate block crayons entirely, but it is a good reason to balance the use. So make sure you're using a mix of both block crayons and stick crayons. I confess that when I draw and when I guide students in drawing, I really like to use block crayons. I remember my students, actually, a couple of them, like wishing that we used the stick crayons more. And I don't know, I think it's just a personal preference thing for me. It's not really that I was intentional about my students' development and what they should be doing, but I liked the result of using a block crayon. And I felt like we could get there more effectively using block crayons than stick crayons. And so what this brings up when I think about it is this contrast, these two ideas, and this really is true throughout the grades, and I see this contrast all throughout in different ways, but it's really this idea of focusing on the small detail versus seeing the whole picture. And to my mind, I have an easier time seeing the whole picture and living into the overall structure of the drawing and the overall composition of the drawing when I'm using a block crayon. And the stick crayon, or even more so a pencil, really encourages me to look at the fine detail. And this is, again, it aligns with this idea of Waldorf education being, from the whole to the part. We want them to be thinking about the whole picture and to understand the whole picture. And rather than to understand the whole picture first and then go into the small detail, rather than starting with a small detail and then seeing how a number of these small details add up together to create a whole picture. So there's a contrast there, right? So it's best if we can find a way to encourage our students to live into the whole picture. And I found that easier to do with block crayons rather than stick crayons. I don't necessarily think that is a must, like that. Your mileage may vary. And I will also say a big disclaimer with all of this: I am not an artist. I don't actually imagine myself as an art teacher. I don't, I did plenty of art with my students, but it was not really the content that I felt like I was a master of teaching in. And it was really the medium that we used to explore the content that I was teaching, but I don't consider myself an expert at teaching the art itself. So that's, my big disclaimer. And if there, and as I've mentioned, that everything that I share is really based on my observation. And so if there might be other ways, and there might be other teachers that have different observations than I have. But what I found was that when I worked with block crayons, my students were able to really hold the whole picture in a much more effective way. There are probably ways to do that using other tools as well, but that was just my experience. And again, like I thought about it, like, should I look up like research that has been done on this? And like a true Waldorf teacher, I work out of my observation. I cultivate my understanding of child development, and then I observe what's in front of me, and that's how I decide what to do. And I wouldn't have it any other way. So that, all that said, so you should work out of your own observation, listen to what I'm saying, and then try it out, and then see what you observe. Okay, that was quite a tangent, but let's go back and talk about crayons. So beeswax. So these beeswax block crayons, block and stick crayons. They are, I just have a few notes I'm looking at. So they really encourage them to not live into the fine details. So that's a really important aspect. And then the other aspect is that they blend so nicely. And so students they can layer color, and they can see how colors interact with one another. And that's a really helpful like layer of their learning that comes from using these crayons. So I think that is another thing that's really beneficial. And so what I want to then talk about is, contrast the use of beeswax crayons, blocks and sticks, to what we might find elsewhere that children use. And maybe they use these things at home, or they take other art classes where they get to experiment with some of these other tools. And that is, first of all, graphite pencils. So I did have a number of students in my experience teaching who were really drawn to graphite pencils. They just wanted to get their pencil really, really sharp and start like drawing the minute details. And that is really like they're really drawn to form, and they're less, they're so focused on the small detail that they're unable to see the big picture. And so, though there are certainly times that we would want to allow children to explore art in whatever way feels resonant and meaningful for them. I don't intend to like devalue that experience for them. But to recognize that these children who were so drawn to graphite, left to their own, devices, they would not have the experience of the whole composition. And I can remember seeing some of those drawings that those students did, where they would just be so focused on those small details, and they would feel like their drawing was complete and they were satisfied with it, and it would take up, like an eighth of the page, right? So this was not a main lesson page, mind you, but just it wasn't like a balanced composition, right? And it also really, that graphite kind of brings in them this like exactness and this like rightness that they want it to be just like perfect and focused on those small details. And I guess I would caution like nurturing that impulse in the child, that they should, not to say that they should, but that, we really want for them to feel greater freedom in their artistic expression. And so, getting locked into the form or into the exactness or the precise like reproduction of something is just not really where they are yet. Maybe in 7th, 8th grade, high school, they'll get there, but that they will get there with and that skill or that experience will also be colored by feeling, right? By the feeling sense that they've developed over the years of drawing with these more sensitive, color-rich tools. So that's one aspect, just like to point out a contrast to drawing with graphite pencil. And so I would avoid that. I would avoid those sort of harsh lines. Sometimes children will want to like outline. This is why we try to avoid drawing outlines. So, if we're drawing a sun, we would start on the inside and then grow it out. And that really is to avoid this, like once you have a line, it's fixed, it's there. And growing it from the inside without having this starting with a harsh line maintains flexibility in the art that you're doing. Again, experience. This is my observation, not from my expertise as an art teacher. There are plenty of those out there that can really give you that more experienced eye. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, and the other thing about graphite, of course, is that it doesn't have color. So like what we're really focused on the feeling life of the child at this time. So all of those things, this flexibility, this like the color, like avoiding the harsh lines are really all these things that kind of live into the feeling life or connect with the feeling life of the child. So you could say that a graphite pencil is a little bit more intellectual and it approaches the thinking life a little bit more. So just you can think about it in those terms. And then let me see what my other notes were. Oh, markers. I do want to talk a little bit about markers because children really like markers. And again, as I've said, there are, there is a time and a place to allow a child, self-expression and freedom in choosing the tools that they use for their drawing. We, as teachers are really called to bring balance. And so we wouldn't want a child to always draw with markers. We wouldn't want a child to always draw with a graphite pencil. And why is that? Like, what is it about a marker that is, different than the experience of drawing with a pencil or a crayon? And it's so funny. I can think of so many students who just really liked the the deep, rich monocolor of a marker, that they tried to recreate that with their pencils and their crayons. And it was just like they would lay on that color so thick that you couldn't see any white behind it. And I actually have a vague memory of myself as a child really appreciating that just solid color as well. But what is it? So why don't we kind of go for that and fulfill that and allow that to happen? And like I said, of course, sometimes you sometimes let them draw with markers. It can feel great. That's fine. But if you imagine the experience of drawing with a marker, like when they do a swipe with a marker, then you are getting like one solid swath of color, right? There's no like room for layering or for depth within that. You can just see like the color itself. And so in that, when you're just laying on this color, what you end up with is like very little um, evidence of the human that was behind creating that color. So when you contrast it to using a block crayon and doing that same swath of color, then what you end up with is very dependent on, that human being's relationship with the paper. What were they pressing hard, or were they pressing soft? Were they a little hard on one end of the crayon versus the other end of the crayon? You can really see the humanness in that swath of color that comes from a block crayon, much more so than with a marker. Now, of course, there's a little nuance there. You can get there a little bit with a marker. And actually, I remember a number of years ago when Copic markers were all the rage. And I think those are like, they're fancy markers that colorists use. Colorists who work on like graphic novels and those kinds of things, they use these Copic markers. And I remember thinking, oh, I'm going to explore that. Maybe that could be a new, hobby or a new way for me to explore artwork. And I remember like watching tutorials and I bought a set of these markers and I tried things out with them. And all of the tutorials that I watched were all about trying to accomplish an experience of depth and of like three-dimensionality. And the way that they encouraged you to accomplish that was to get a number of different shades of the same color and the only way you could do that was by getting different markers. So you might have a medium green that had a a medium, a dark, medium, and light version of that same green. And that if you had all three of those markers, then you could accomplish that depth. And I just remember feeling so frustrated because I remember thinking, well, if I had a pencil or a crayon, I could do this with just one tool and just adjust my relationship with the paper. Am I pressing hard or soft? And so again, like, the point is that markers just kind of take away the humanness of the artwork there. So yeah. The other thing, of course, when you contrast them to crayons is that they are, they're pretty artificial. They don't, I mean, sometimes I remember those scented markers that they had when I was a kid and that I just loved those. I always got like marks on my nose because I would smell them. But it's not the same experience that students get with beeswax, right? There's just like the scent of it a little bit. There's the warmth. There's the weight. It is a natural material, much different than the experience of a plastic marker. Again, sometimes use the markers. It's totally fine. I even had a couple of class sets of markers in my classroom in second grade, I think is when I started doing that, because I would let them have free rendering time, and they could just choose whatever they wanted to work on. And sometimes they wanted to use markers. And if I was instructing them, it was with beeswax crayons or pencils. But if, they were working on their own in freedom and exploring, I let them use what they wanted. Sometimes when you're making a sign, you want a good marker. And so then when it comes to like product recommendations, my only experience really is with Stockmar. That's what I used in the classroom. I've only taught the lower grades once, so that's really just what I use. Stockmar block and stick crayons. They have those nice little crayon rolls, and you slot the colors into, which is nice because then the colors stay true. They don't get flecks of other colors on them. So, those are a very nice tool for teaching children to take care of their supplies. So, I always told they had to put away their crayon before they took out a new one. That was just in their habit. So at the end, everybody had all their crayons in the same order. So anyway, it was just very clear. It's a good tool for that kind of practice. It doesn't really matter that much if their crayons are in the same order as everybody else's, but it's one of those things that just kind of teaches like attention to detail, and that it's important to take care of your supplies and that kind of thing. So in that regard, it does matter. I will mention, so my only experience, of course, is with Stockmar, but I know that there is another brand and what I've heard criticism of Stockmar is that the actual quantity of beeswax that is in the Stockmar crayons is pretty low, and that there are other crayon brands that have a higher percentage of beeswax. So I will do a little looking and link to something if you're interested in learning more about that. And then let's see. Oh, I want to make sure I talk about pencils. So, and caring for pencils. So we'll get to that. Let's move on to talking about pencils now. So, with pencils in general, I had class sets of pencils starting, I think in first grade, we had red, blue, and green, and I handed them out when it was time to use a pencil, and I collected them back. And so we used them really specifically only for writing. If we were drawing, it was with our beeswax crayons. In second grade, I think it was about the same, but I had more colors, I believe. And I think maybe in just thinking about it, I think I would occasionally, I don't remember if I did this or not, but I could imagine it sometimes being valuable to use a pencil for something specific in a drawing. So maybe that would happen. So, which isn't a bad thing to get them in the habit of recognizing, oh, okay, I could use a pencil in a drawing too, if they're, all you're ever doing is using your crayons. In third grade, actually, I think maybe I still did class sets. I did. And, we handed them out, but they were available to them. So I think each row, we had a set of pencils in those three colors, but students didn't have their own, like in their desk of those crayons or of those pencils. And so we would hand them out when they were needed. But if somebody needed one, at some other time, it was available and they could get them. But still primarily just used for writing. And then in fourth grade is when we made the shift to drawing with our pencils. Thinking about that transition, going from third grade, first of all, the first time I made that, I taught fourth grade. It was my first year teaching fourth grade. And before that, I had been teaching middle school. And so I was just in the habit of drawing with colored pencils. I didn't even give it another thought that what they had been doing was drawing with crayons. And so we just dove in. I think if I were to do it again, and then the second time when I taught fourth grade, we were learning entirely online. And so I think if we had been in person, I would have recognized a little bit, and I would have maybe coaxed that transition a little with a little more intention. But I do think it's valuable for them to start drawing with colored pencils in fourth grade. And one way that you can sort of navigate that transition is, one, let them keep their crayons. So I had a pencil case, and this was actually the one that I gave them in fourth grade. And I don't have this one set up this way now, but and I think that you're seeing this, but I had on in this top pocket is where I put the block crayons. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see that I put their block crayons in this top zipper area, and they actually fit really nicely. And that was a good way for, they were there and accessible to them, but they didn't use them a lot. And so but we did sometimes like draw the sky and the landscape with the block crayon and then go into the detail with the pencil. I think that's a really good way to do it. And yeah, so I guess I did navigate that transition a little more thoughtfully. So I really like that approach to doing it in fourth grade. So the block crayons, we didn't have stick crayons at that time. It was just those block crayons and the pencils, because I think the pencils can replace the need for the stick crayons. But those block crayons, really, they're so good at helping students see the whole picture that I held on to them. So that was really the approach that I took. And the pencils that I prefer in fourth grade are the large triangular ones. And so you can see, I don't know what you're seeing, but this is an example. And there are 3 different brands that I know of that make these large triangular ones. And so they're Lyra Super Furby. The other is Stockmar. And then Mercurius, which is the shop that sells Waldorf supplies to most Waldorf schools, they have their own brand that's called Art Makes Sense. And so that's the 3rd one. I like all 3 of them perfectly fine. And I would not even say that I have a preference of one over the other. All 3 are great. And in this giant pencil case that I have sitting next to me, I have all 3 mixed up in here. I have quite a collection from what were my own children's pencils, what were my pencils from when I was teaching. So I have all 3 of them kind of all mixed up. The opinion that I do have that I will recommend is about how long you hold on to these pencils and when you change away from them, or if you do. And I've shared this before, but I had a student in 8th grade, the first time I taught middle school, I think in 6th grade. Yes, I think it was in 6th grade, I ordered the thinner Lyra pencils, the Rembrandts, or maybe it was in 7th grade. And I had a student who held on to his Super Furbies, and that's what he used. And he kept them in his backpack, and his classmates would often ask him if they could use his pencils, those Super Furbies. And so I just kind of noted that. And then I noticed in myself that, I really like those Super Furbies. There's something really nice. The color is really vibrant. And they're really good pencils. And I think he was also one of those students who really he wanted his pencils to be like markers. And that is maybe a little easier to do with a nice thick pencil than the thinner ones. But what I noticed, what that got me thinking about was, often teachers buy those thinner pencils because they think that students can get more detailed in their drawing when they have a thinner pencil. But I don't think that's true. I think that a sharp pencil is a sharp pencil. And I don't think that this thicker Stockmar pencil is going to get any less sharp than the Lyra Rembrandt, which is the thinner one. And so I would say to use these all the way through 8th grade. And then that can then free up any, budget that you may have for special pencils or, other things that can, other artistic supplies that can support their work. So I would really stick with these thick ones all the way through. And I think that the best way to do that, it brings up another thought, which is this one about maintaining your supplies and taking care of them. And that is something that I think is really important. And that if you teach your children, your students, to take care of their supplies, then you can use them year after year after year. And you can, instead of buying each child a set of pencils at the beginning of the school year, you can purchase individual colors of pencils, boxes of colors of pencils, and then you can replenish the ones that get used more frequently, because inevitably those sets come with colors that you just never are going to use. Like they often come with a white, which maybe there's a reason to use a white pencil. I never really did. And, but I would say that even if you want to use a white pencil, order boxes of colors rather than a full set. And that way you can be intentional about the colors that you want to use, and then you can replenish the colors that get used up. Inevitably the red, it's also very breaky for some reason. And so you can give your students a new red pencil whenever they need it, rather than making them wait until the next time you order, the next year when they get their new set of pencils. And so at the end of the school year, my students and I, during that last week of school, we would take out our pencil cases, line up all of our pencils, go through them all, replace the ones that, were short. They would get them all nice and sharp. They would use sandpaper to kind of clean up any grime that was on them. They'd clean out the case really nicely. So they were just like really beautiful and ready to go. And then they would put everything back in, zip it up, and I would collect it. And so then when school started the next year, they had a nice new fresh set of pencils ready to use. And I didn't have to order a new set of pencils. And it really just saved budget, and it was a really good, effective use of our supply funds. So that is what I would do. And then that makes it, all the more possible to keep them going on into 8th grade. I will say that, as they come into 8th grade or, 7th grade or even 6th grade, they want something new. Every year they should get something that is a little bit different and new compared to what they used the year before. And so let's talk about that a little bit. So if they are sticking with these Lyra Super Furby pencils all the way through, then what are they using? What's the spark? What's the interesting thing that they get to use? And so I think I have something for each grade, sort of, maybe not. But let's kind of go there and talk about that. So the first thing is, and it falls outside of these like staple supplies that we've been talking about, but so these are the extras. So the first thing is oil crayons. And I would say Filia oil crayons, I really like. They're actually really inexpensive. And what I think they're really good for is bridging that gap between going from block crayons to drawing with pencils, because they have a sharp tip, but you can also use the side to create, like a landscape. And so I would take a look at those. So like I said, in 4th grade, I gave them their block crayons still, but if you didn't want to do that, you could give them these, they're super Furby pencils and a set of these oil crayons. And I think they're really nice. I really like them. They don't draw very they're not super pigmented, but they erase, which sometimes children appreciate that about them. And but they sort of function in the same way that a block and a stick crayon would, because they can do that swath of color, and they can help get that whole picture of the drawing rather than focusing on the detail, which they would be so likely to do when they're just using their pencils. So that maybe is the extra special thing that comes in 4th grade. 5th, maybe you can think about that. The other special supply that I actually, when I used, one year I gave these to my students in 4th grade, and that was way too early. And I think maybe 5th grade or maybe 6th grade, I would bring these Caran Dash, that CARAND''ACHE, water soluble crayons. And they sell these in both water soluble and non-water soluble. And so the water soluble ones are kind of approaching like a watercolor crayon. And because of that, they are very, they can be crumbly, and children could use them to draw very darkly, like they're almost maybe approaching a pastel. But I used these in place of pastels in 5th grade. Like I said, I am not an art teacher. I have less experience with pastels than I would like. And so I did not use them as much as maybe I should have with my, I would say 5th and 6th graders, I think would be great to use pastels with. But these water soluble crayons I just found to be really helpful, and just another like extra interesting way of working with watercolor. And I actually gave them, I did give them to my students in 4th grade that year that we were online, because we could not do watercolor painting very easily. So I gave them these crayons, and I coached them through painting with that. And then it's nice to give them, they have, those very inexpensive water pens. They're super cheap, and you just fill them with water, and so they can draw with the pastel or the crayon, water soluble crayon, and then use the water pen over it to kind of blend, and it is such a satisfying experience. I really love working with watercolor in that way. I would be thoughtful about doing that in your main lesson book. I probably would not. I would probably do it on watercolor paper, and then you can always glue it into your book if you want it to be about that. Or if you're doing it in just like a very minimal way, and then I would maybe put something underneath so it doesn't like get the others wet behind it. But that might be a little much for students to manage. So I would say that those crayons, which I just love, they are expensive though. But I would say maybe 5th grade or possibly 6th. They feel like actually perfect for the kind of art that you're doing in 5th grade, but the management of them is maybe a little bit hard for a 5th grader. So you might bring it in the middle of 5th grade, something like that. 6th grade is it has its own sort of separate approach to artwork. And so I don't know. I imagine they could still use them really well in 6th grade, and they would be able to manage them quite well by that point too. But there are other things going on in 6th grade. So, okay, so we talked about a little something extra in 4th grade. 4th grade is the oil crayons. 5th grade is the water soluble crayons. 6th grade is really all about charcoal. So you do a lot of work with charcoal in 6th grade. I'm not going to dive too much into that because it has its own separate lesson. But I would live into, like, this is the time when a really good quality graphite pencil would be appropriate. Like, they're really into the dark and light and exploring, you know, the extremes to find the gray that's in the middle. And so having a good graphite pencil is a great way to do that. And I didn't discover these when I was teaching. Oh, maybe I did actually that last year, but they were in 5th grade, so they weren't really doing much with graphite. But the Blackwing pencils, I really love them. Again, they're expensive, so they might be something you hand out when you're going to use them and then you collect them back. But what's really nice about them is that they're a soft pencil, and so they can't help but experience shades of gray when they use it. And yeah, I can't even explain my experience with it very well, but it's a nice soft pencil, and it's like writing, it's like butter. It just is such an enjoyable experience using these Blackwing pencils. So if you have students who gravitate to graphite and they have wanted to draw with their graphite pencil for, you know, all these years, 6th grade is going to be pretty satisfying for them, although they will probably at that point, they'll be craving mechanical pencils. So maybe if you can give them a Blackwing pencil, they'll feel satisfied and they won't, you know, go towards that mechanical pencil quite yet. Okay, so that is 6th grade. 7th grade is when I would really, I would, you know, stick with the Lyra, the fat pencils, and maybe give them watercolor pencils. And I think this is what I did. You can give them a little set of watercolor pencils, and those they can use in their books. And I think that could be a nice, then to use the water pen again to blend a little bit, but I think that the watercolor pencils are a really nice touch in 7th grade, which of course also has its own, you know, artistic side, you know, with perspective drawing and all of that, where you can use your graphite pencils. Maybe that mechanical pencil lover will get his due when it comes to 7th grade. And then in 8th grade, I'm not sure. I think we've explored so many different supplies. I don't have a great idea. Maybe in 8th grade, I would get them the Lyra Rembrandts, those thin pencils, so that they don't have to stick with their Super Furbies all the way through, although I can guarantee some will prefer them. So those are my thoughts about tools for drawing. Who knew that a person could talk this long about pencils and crayons? But, you know, when you have opinions and you love this stuff, I guess it's not that hard. I would love to hear from you, and, you know, what are some of the supplies that you have used all the way through? What are your preferences? If you have any tips for helping your students to take care of their supplies, or are there any things, you know, that you feel strongly about? I would love to hear about it. So share in the comments. You can share in the comments either on the blog post on the website that goes along with this episode, or hop over to YouTube and you can leave comments there. And I will put links to some of the things that I've talked about in the description box on YouTube and in the blog post. And I think that's it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.